My name is Xabier Palacio, and I have been working at Esomar for now a number of years. To keep it a little bit simple, I would like to start with a brief slide just to talk about the history of the ICC Esomar International Code of Conduct. It's been going on for a while. So I think it is good to see a little bit what the journey has looked like over the years. Also, a word on the importance of self-regulation. I think it is important to understand what the ultimate goal of the code is. And lastly, to talk about the 2025 updates of the code and what it includes, how it went, and what are the main areas that we are covering in this update. Talk about the history of the ICC International Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct has been an integral part of the Esomar endeavor since the very beginning. As you can see, Esomar was created, was born in 1947. Those of you with a keen eye will realize that, well, just next year, it's going to be a very special year because it's 2027. We will be celebrating the 80th anniversary of Esomar. But really shortly thereafter, in 1948, Esomar already created the first code of conduct. The code of conduct was a way of self-regulating, and it was a response to how the industry worked at the time. Since its inception, it was meant to be was expected that we would revise the code over the years. And as such, revisions happened in 1968, the first one, for example. There is a very important date here as well, 1977, which is when the code, or when Esomar joined forces with the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, and we drafted or we created a joint code ever since. So that's quite an important milestone. Revisions have continued to happen over the years, such as in 2007, to include new advances in digital research, in 2017, to incorporate changes in the legislation related to data privacy. So think about, for example, GDPR. And now, most recently, in 2025, which includes, among other things, and we will explore this, which looks into technological advancements in the industry. So over the years, of course, Esomar presents the code globally, but local associations can also adopt or endorse it locally. The network that we have created is of over 60 associations around the world that either or that recognize the code one way or another. Some countries, like happens with the US, have more than one association. That's why some of them fully adopt it, some of them endorse it, and that's hence this funny coloring. But it shows the reach of the code and how it is really global in nature. Let me go to a second level here, second layer. What is the importance of self-regulation? Of course, in the market opinion and social research and data analytics sector. But there are 5 core reasons that really refine the value of self-regulation. First, we have trust, which is one of the important ones, and I see that many of you have already responded on. The entire research and insights ecosystem depends on trust, whether it is trust from citizens who share their data, trust from clients who rely on our evidence, trust from policymakers, and trust from society at large. Self-regulation is the mechanism that allows us to sustain and demonstrate that trust consistently. There are some other ideas, of course. Self-regulation also protects citizens and data subjects. It ensures that ethical principles apply even in areas where the law is not yet clear or up to date. It's how we make sure that participation is respectful, consent is meaningful, vulnerable groups are treated carefully, and data is used responsibly as well. It's also like strong self-regulation helps prevent over-regulation, and some of you also touched on this. When an industry shows that it can govern itself credibly and transparently, regulators are far less likely to step in with restrictive or ill-fitted rules. And in other words, responsible behavior buys us the freedom to operate. Fourth, self-regulation gives us agility. Our industry evolves faster than regulation ever can. And some of you also responded on this one. whether it is artificial intelligence, synthetic data, new collection technologies, or new analytical methods. Having standards, codes, and industry-driven governance can adapt quickly and provide guidance where no legal framework yet exists. And fifth, self-regulation allows for global harmonization and professionalization. With our work crossing borders every day, we need principles and standards that are consistent internationally. Self-regulation lets us maintain a global baseline of ethics and good practice, regardless of where a project is conducted. Of course, there are some other areas. Below these main ones, you also see some other reasons that will definitely matter. Just to mention them, uh, transparency and accountability, preventing misconduct and reputational damage, both to the companies, but as well to the industry, ensuring professional competence and enabling safe, responsible innovation. The idea is that self-regulation is not a nice to have. It's the core operating system that keeps us, our industry credible, ethical, and future-proof. So having laid or having grounded this concept, then we can move on to the next element on the actual update of the code of practice. The 2025 edition of the code went through several global consultations, around 4 global consultations over the course of 2024 and 2025. Overall, we received more than 350 comments from industry associations, from our membership, from other experts, so basically from the entire ecosystem and the entire community. And we went through them with a very capable team that it would be amiss if I didn't mention. So we have the ICC Esomar code revision team. It was composed by people from ICC as well as from Esomar. So Anders Stenlund, Axel Thunberg, Georgina de Geratu, fantastic professional, and from Esomar, Judith Passingham, at the time, chair to the Professional Standards Committee, and Raymond Wildner, Philippe Gilbert, Vinaya Huya, Melanie Courtwright, Kathy Joe, and David Pring as pen holder. Fantastic professionals that sieved and discussed all of the feedback until we landed on the text that you know that you can access today. After an initial global consultation that already happened at the end of 2023, the ICC-SMR code received plenty of feedback by the global community. This feedback was organized and categorized into 5 broad areas, which you can see here. The first one on broadening the broadening of the researcher role, which we also understand as the disintermediation of the research process. Areas of AI and technology and how well the code covers them. Areas of transparency, areas of diversity and inclusion, and lastly, areas of duty of care. If I may go through each one of them, then we can see how the industry has changed, how you also think about it, and how the code responds to each of them. So let's begin with the broadening of the researcher role, the disintermediation of the research process. And I would like to go back a little bit to some of the reports that we present at Esomar. In this case, Esomar's global market research that we published in September, so it's just a couple of months old. The insights industry has suffered remarkable changes over the past couple of decades. Today, it includes companies with business practices so different that that while they are all competitors in the extraction of knowledge, they operate in fundamentally different ways. This has prompted Esomar to differentiate them accordingly into 3 separate sectors that you can see here in these 3 different colors. Market research companies, they are characterized by full service research agencies and sample panel providers that support data collection. So this is the blue, and here we can see how they have been growing over the years. Research software companies, they are characterized by offering subscription-based software solutions that either help or carry out research. Think of, for example, self-serve research platforms, digital data analytics, CRM systems, or social listening and communities. And lastly, we have business services here in this kind of reddish carmine color, focused on informing the industry through industry reports or advising clients on the implementation of the insights. So think about companies like Gartner, McKinsey, Bain, right? Of course, for these companies, we only look at the portion of turnover related to the generation or activation of insights. All in all, we have an industry of about 153 billion US dollars. And we expect, but let's see what happens, but we expect to be able to report this year about around 165 billions for the industry. That simplistic graph can be looked at a little bit differently. If you ask many of the companies in either of the three sectors, many will answer that they also offer services of the adjacent sectors. Companies like Ipsos or Kantar, or many others actually, may say that they also offer subscription-based products and advisory services. And the same may be true for companies in the other two sectors. As such, we can represent the industry through a triangle with overlapping regions that you can see here, these little triangles here. They account for the share of turnover that each sector generates through offering services related to the other ones. At the moment, we only have data for the market research, but we can see how almost 1/3 of its turnover, 31%, is generated through research software, 7% through business services, and the remaining 62% is market research itself. So this shows the profound change that the industry has seen and has tremendous consequences when reviewing the code of conduct. This is what we understand as disintermediation. This schematic gives a perspective on the way in which research used to function in the past. This was a rather linear way in which we had the client would hand off to an end-to-end research company that took care of the entire process and, well, controlled it to a large extent, and eventually would produce the results back to the client. Nowadays, however, this has basically gone on its head. Over the last year, we have seen substantial changes on how it functions. Client and researcher are often interchangeable, although there is always a client, and of course, they often do some of the research themselves through self-serve processes as well. But there are many areas where they look into. They already have data from their own CRM systems. The client also needs to understand the impact of privacy. Sample is often run by third-party marketplaces with multiple sources. We also have seen the appearance of synthetic data, right? And with substantial claims in some cases. At the deliverable end of research projects, we see multiple parties which are either involved, subcontracted, or offshored. So as we can see, we have gone from a linear process to an ecosystem, and this changes how the code also functions. This is what we call the broadening of the researcher role. So the code deals with these aspects in several areas, and I will go very quickly, but just to say that from top to bottom, right, from the introduction, whether it is in the fundamental principles, we already talk about responsibility and responsibility with interpretation of the findings. We have updated the definitions to also accommodate areas like artificial intelligence, synthetic data, etc. We also remind users to declare the use of subcontractors upon request, to declare the use of AI and synthetic to clients to make sure that responsibility is properly accounted for. And we also have these compliance and responsibility clauses. And of course, Article 12 regarding the clause on recommended compliance regarding contracts. So this is basically a way of saying, if you're a client, please ensure that the contract that you sign with your provider shows that the provider also abides by the code of conduct. Let's look briefly and let's move on. Let's move from this whole area of disintermediation to now a different one, the growing use of AI and emerging technologies. We can see what happened in the global prices study. As Rhiannon was saying, what does research cost? And this is my take, but I see that slowly things are perhaps changing, right? But at the moment, AI has not yet shown its promised potential. At the same time, we see that there is a great deal of potential to be extracted over time, of course, right? So as such, the code needs to support responsible AI development and provide sufficient assurances for client to trust its application as well as for agencies to deploy it safely, right? So we hope that we provide that framework that allows AI to develop and yet to develop it responsibly. We, moving on to another of our reports, the Global Users and Buyers of Insights that we also published last year, we asked, how is your organization utilizing AI at the moment? And we can see also something a little bit similar, that when clients, the users and buyers were asked how much their organization was using AI, we were able to create a sort of a barometer of AI, right, of sorts. And as can be seen here, implementation is rather patchy, generally low, right? And it shows that mistrust seems to be rampant and there is wide ignorance about how to begin about AI. We followed up with another question, in fact, which is, what do you think will be the main challenges you expect to be facing over the next 2 to 5 years? And the main one is actually the implementation of AI. This gap is in understanding this low level of implementation, this general promise, which still needs to materialize, is fertile ground for companies overclaiming capabilities in their AI systems. It also opens up the possibility of snake oil sellers overclaiming the capabilities of their AI systems. And this is the reason why the code needs to guide development, transparency, and accountability of these tools. Now, how does it do it? And this is the slide that shows the points where we do all of that. First, being clear about the definitions and include a reference to new technologies. Second, the obligations to ensure that findings are properly supported, as happens already in Article 7, right? Providing technical information, the findings that should be properly supported by data, and providing independent checks. Also, as in Article 6, the protection of personal data and inferred identity, right? Also, clarity about planned use of AI and synthetic, right? Clients must be informed when AI or emerging tech is going to be used and the extent of human oversight, which is also quite important, right? When we're using synthetic personas for data collection, it happens in Article 4. It must be clearly notified to the data subject as well, right? We also have the confidentiality when using AI, like as in Article 7. And lastly, to make sure that we respect IP and copyright, as in Article 8, where we say that researchers must comply with any intellectual property restrictions, such as copyright or privacy requirements associated to its use. So this is a little bit how some of the elements we deal with AI in the code. Let's move on to transparency. First of all, we have the revised fundamental principles. For example, all research must be legal, honest, transparent, and truthful. And data subjects in Fundamental Principle 3 must clearly understand how their personal data will be collected and used. So here we have transparency when providing the findings, but also transparency when dealing with the data subjects, which is quite important. Transparency to clients, not only about when using AI, but also about its limitations, right? And this happens in Article 7 as well. We need to design studies that are appropriate for the population in question and reflect the intended target group as accurately as possible. But also, researchers must provide clients with sufficient technical information, right, including methods or sources of data, quality controls, analysis, so that they can also assess the validity of the results and insights and conclusions. Also, transparency to data subjects, right, as happens in Article 4, on the purpose of research, the usage of personal data, on Article 6, on having a clear privacy notice, on the how we manage data breaches, or how we also manage data transfers securely and safely. Also, transparency when using subcontractors, right? A stronger statement on Article 8 on disclosure of the usage of subcontractors upon request. On publishing findings, right? It's important to reflect, or important that researchers and clients ensure that the public has access to sufficient information, and also to make sufficient technical information available to the public so that they understand what goes on behind all the research. So transparency, it's a core principle. Allow me to touch also a little bit briefly on diversity and inclusion. And what I would like to do here is to show a really brief, simplified, of course, simplified case study on why it is important to keep in mind the diversity of the population that we are studying, and to include as much of it as possible. Despite its great potential, we have already seen that certain types of AI use may bring about some risks that we need to tackle. In this example, we have a population with its own characteristics. The different colors on the left represent the traits, or maybe they represent opinions of the population, or they represent any other part, but it basically is a composition of the industry, or sorry, of the population that we are studying. When extracting data from a sample that we can use to train an AI with, we may run the risk of leaving some of these colors out of the sample, right? And if we then take the AI and expand it to our conclusions, and if we expand it to create takeaways, or if we expand the sample itself, we need to be cognizant, we need to keep in mind these limitations, that the generated population may not be as chromatic, so to speak, as the original or real population. That outliers that you in the sample that you can see here with this kind of like purple dot may be overrepresented. You can see how it is bigger than the sample itself, or that the error margin may grow exponentially. These risks are represented in the next slide. In here, we can see how, despite the AI's huge potential, those using AI may lack the necessary experience, yet they may be responsible for its usage and its output. So this is part of also, or a consequence of the disintermediation that we have seen before. We need to avoid, as explained earlier, the existence of black boxes, so transparency on what is going on inside of the AI. Users must also be aware of the type of bias that may exist in the training data, and therefore in the output. And we need to be, or to consider, potential observed or unobserved errors. So there is quite a lot going on here. And this brings me to this idea of diversity and inclusion. We have already touched on the areas of biases in the population, on representativity, on the error. So the code deals like this by homing in on the area of disclosure about deficiencies in sample, disclosure about the nature of samples and whether they are representative, and through identification of areas of bias. So we have just a few points here. We have this in article basically 7 on how researchers must carefully design studies that are appropriate for the population in question, also to provide technical information. And as I was saying as well, researchers in Article 8 must identify any known potential or suspected biases in the research that may have an impact on the collection, curation, processing, analysis, or interpretation of the data and the findings. The very last point, and I know that I'm getting to a little bit to the end of this presentation. The last point is to clarify requirements for primary and secondary data collection and more attention to duty of care. So I would like to summarize as well how the code looks into this very important one. First, we have fundamental principle 2, right? When we say that all research must be conducted with due care, interactions must be fair, respectful, and avoid harming the data subjects. That sounds basic, is fundamental to keep in mind, and that's why it makes the fundamental principles. Article 1, essential personal data must be disclosed to emergency services in exceptional, life-threatening, or abusive situations as defined by local law. We also have Article 5. The use of the data will not result in direct harm to data subjects, and there are measures in place to prevent such harm. And lastly, data protection or privacy is also expanded to cover artificial intelligence in Article 6. So there are quite a few areas where we also look into duty of care and primary and secondary data. So this is quite a lot. I would like to close off. What do we do with this? I recognize that Esomar's membership is composed by a plethora of members. You may come from the user and buyer side. You may come from a research agency. You may be you may support research services through through software or through any other area. If you work with research, make sure that you activate the code, that it is part of how you train your personnel, that it is part of how you conduct business, and that you add a line in the contracts that you offer to your clients. If you're a user or a buyer, ask providers to include a clause in the contract. This is already in the code. It's a suggestion, but I think it's a nice one. Are you a research association? Well, make sure you adopt the code as your own. Or are you just supporting research? Well, follow it in your work as well, and make sure that the entire ecosystem of research is protected at every level, so that trust, which is what we mentioned was one of the key elements of self-regulation, is maintained in the industry.